Yeah, so welcome everyone back to the channel. Today I'm very happy. I have a contemplative reader, Jay, here as a guest, and we are going to talk about the Book of the New Sun, and more specifically, the first book, Shadow of the Torturer, today, from you could say a spiritual perspective, because this really has a lot of that. So, welcome back, Jay, to the channel. I'm happy that you are here.
It is good to be back. Thank you for the invitation to talk about what is possibly my favorite science fiction read of all time, although I have not actually finished the series yet. I have read Shadow of the Torturer and Claw the Conciliator, and will be working my way through the rest of the series, hopefully soon in the next few months.
Yeah, I think, and you're on the second. You have read it twice, right?
Yes, I've read Shadow of the Torturer twice. I'm in the process of rereading Claw the Conciliator, the second book in Book of the New Sun series. I saw you holding up your copy of the book a moment ago.
Yeah.
I have two copies of this. In the United States, the first two books are bound up in one volume, Shadow of the Torturer and Claw the Conciliator, and this one I'm
Like this.
holding up. But then a month or two ago, I was at a used bookstore, and they had hardback editions of actually all five books, if you count Earth of the New Sun and Book of the New Sun. Uh, First edition hardback books in just pristine mint condition. So I did pick up all of those. So I do have those now too.
Nice. Yeah. I think as you know, for us reading a lot of books, I think many copies are good. I used to take notes in these paperbacks, for example, and underline and so on. And then maybe I have a better version which I don't take notes in. If it's books that are really good.
Right, right.
Jay has been here on the channel before, as I mentioned. We had a great talk. Also, the video was called Spiritual Book Talk, and I think we found each other well during that hour when we spoke about spiritual perspectives. But maybe some of you are watching haven't met Jay, so if you would like to just describe your channel a bit as well for the viewers.
Thank you. It's good. As I mentioned, it is wonderful to be back, and thank you for the invitation. So my channel is a contemplative reader, and that reflects my interest in finding deeper spiritual meanings and symbolism in whatever I might happen to be reading. So far on my channel, I've primarily covered science fiction and fantasy. I do intend to broaden my channel out this year to talk more about what I've been reading in terms of theology and other matters. But a significant focus of my channel will still be on finding spiritual symbolism and meaning in literature. And Gene Wolfe, out of all of the books I've read so far since beginning my channel, Gene Wolfe has by far provided the most fodder for my deep dive analyses, because his books are just loaded with symbolism.
Yeah, for sure. For those not knowing anything about the Book of the New Sun, because this is a very difficult, we talked about it before we started to record, it might be difficult to sum up. We're going to have the discussion on spiritual themes, and then there we will touch upon the plot in different ways. But if we should say something about the plot, this is about Severian. He is a part of the Torturer's Apprentice Guild, and it's a sci-fi fantasy book that we will maybe discuss a bit too. It's a bit difficult to understand it from time to time what genre this is. And Severian, who has been raised in this guild since childhood, happens to be expelled from this guild for reasons that are a bit spoilerish. We will first talk about this book in general terms, and then we will alert you when it's spoiler time. He is expelled, and he has to go out in this world with a sword to basically find meaning, because all the ways he's been taught and how he's lived his life is now turned upside down. So that is a very, very simple description. He's a torturer, and there are prisoners that he then has as clients, if you could say so. It sounds a bit bizarre to talk about that. Do you want to add something to this very, very, very simple plot description?
I think as far as a non-spoiler plot description, that's a pretty good one.
Yeah. This book is quite, I mean, it's written in the 80s or maybe earlier. I'm curious, Jay, how you found the book, and since it's the second time you read now, I'm curious about your, initial impressions when you did not reread it, but read it for the first time. What did you think?
Sure. So as to the question of how I found the book, I did not know of it personally until started seeing it discussed on BookTube, Sci-Fi and Fantasy channels, sometime through probably 3 to 4 years ago, and different booktubers were talking about it and talking about how engrossing it is in terms of the story, but also the deep symbolism involved from a Catholic perspective. Just a brief note in case somebody one of your viewers didn't happen to watch our earlier conversation. So I'm a pastor in the Lutheran tradition, but I have extensive training and background in Roman Catholic spirituality as well. So I'm fairly well versed in both traditions. So I was interested in reading this because Gene Wolfe, what I was hearing from these book reviews was that Gene Wolfe would embed much of his spirituality and theology into the text of these books. So that intrigued me for sure to read them. Just as a side note, when I told my older brother that I was going to be reading these books, he told me that no less than Ursula K. Le Guin at a sci-fi convention recommended that he read Gene Wolfe. So my
Yeah,
brother,
yeah.
this was back in the 1980s. So my brother actually read Book of the New Sun 30, 40 years ago.
Okay.
And I didn't know it because I was a younger kid. I didn't follow what he was reading. But so as to your next question, so yeah, so I was at a bookstore and I found these compendiums of the Book of the New Sun and these duology 2-volume set, 2-book sets. And so I picked it up and read it the first time about 2 years ago now. And I remember thinking, yeah, this was as good as advertised in terms of what deeply atmospheric novel you feel engrossed in the story in this world, and how each page had these weird terms that you had to decipher what they meant, and also lots of spiritual symbolism and ritual and lots of things going on. So I enjoyed it the first time, but I remembered thinking at the time, I'm going to need to reread this before I move on in the series. So around a year later, so we're talking probably the first half of last year, I reread it. This time through what has become a favorite method of reading of mine, which is immersive reading. Meaning I'm reading the physical copy in front of me and I'm listening to an audiobook narration of it at the same time. And I believe his name is Jonathan Davis. At least has the audiobook narration here in the United States in English. And he is a phenomenal narrator. very helpful in terms of immersing yourself in the world. So as I reread Shadow of the Torturer, um, I was taking detailed notes. And again, on every page, I was writing down, this character has this name and is based upon a saint name.
Mm.
And this ritual of the faith is mentioned and adapted into this futuristic world that Gene Wolfe has given us here in Earth, spelled Urth.
Mm-hmm.
And just lots of other details, spiritual themes, symbolism. So it was just a gold mine for somebody like me to read and reread. I imagine when I'm finished with all of Book of the New Sun, I will
Mm.
want to reread it. And I know some people have read and reread it multiple times.
Yeah, I read about someone who read it once every second year or something like that. I think every
Mm-hmm.
decade was one other, but people going back to this because they learn new things from the book. There's a lot of wisdom or teachings I think you can find in this book. So I think your story is interesting in how you found it. Actually, for me, you are one of several people on who are subscribing to my channel who advised me to pick up this book. So actually, thanks to you and other people, I started to read it. And also, when I finished my last Book of the Fallen, it was on the Reddit there, the subreddit, books that are not similar, I would say, but what do you do after you have finished Malasa Book of the Fallen? You have read like 10,000 pages and you don't know what to do, then Gene Wolfe came up because the prose, some people think are similar to Erickson's and also the symbolic way of describing things. Even I think they are very different though. So that was the reason I started to read it actually.
Very good. Well, I'm glad that we didn't steer you wrong.
No, no, no. I think you were spot on. But with that said, you talked about your profession and your spiritual background. If you watched our first conversation or have followed my channel, you know a bit about mine. I'm, though, a layman, so to speak, in many terms, but I'm grown up in the Lutheran Church in Sweden. And then, as many of you who follow my channel, you know, I went back to India to explore my roots, and especially Hinduism, which I've learned and also practiced. And actually, I combine, not combine, but we celebrate Christmas and Hindu holidays nowadays at home. So it's kind of mixed. But my spiritual interest is very big. So this book is, of course, very interesting for me, even if I don't have, and that will be interesting to listen to you, Jay, about the reference you have maybe to Catholicism and to the Bible and to Lutheran Christianity as well, maybe mostly Catholicism in this. For me, mainly it's, I won't spoil what I'm going to say, but there are a lot of passages that I found very, very interesting and a lot of food for thought, spiritual thought. We want to explore the spiritual science in the Book of the New Sun. So I would like to start to ask you what themes or what science or spirituality have you found? I know you have found a lot, but I'm curious, what have you found so
Sure.
far?
So in my video on my channel, where I unpacked the spiritual meaning of Shadow of the Torture, I categorized the spiritual symbolism into three separate categories. And that's just my own, that's nothing official. There's nothing, it's not a rule. That's just kind of how I looked at it. And this categorization helped me then put a framework on my analysis. And then as I was discovering meanings and themes and symbolic references within the text, I would generally assign that reference to one of these categories. So the first category, I'll just walk through them briefly, and then we can talk more in detail about them. So the first category would be, I think in Shadow of the Torture, I think it is evident that Severian, again, the main character in the book, was deeply shaped by his youth and being raised up within the context of what could be described as a quasi religious order, a monastic order, or some sort of a deeply ritualistic religious community. In a certain sense, it's not a. If you read it on the surface, you would think, well, there's not religious references there, at least not to a great extent. But when you explore it more deeply, you'll see, for example, that there's a patron saint essentially of this order. And in fact, so Severian again is raised up in this guild of torturers from his early youth, but the actual name of the group is called the Order of Seeker of Truth and Penitence, which is similar to what a religious order or monastic community might be named. The structure of progression through the order is similar to progression in life in a monastic order. You start off as a novice, and then you move on to different grades until you become all the way up to the equivalent of an abbot, which in the monastic community, in this guild of torturers, is called a master. There's Master Playman, Master Malrubius, etc. So there's that whole framework has, I think, a deep impact on who Severian is and how he deals with the events that come his way during the course of the book. Again, there's more detail we can go into on that. The second category, just to get through this initial summation, the second category would be there's a deeply sacramental quality to the book. Sacramental, again, from the perspective that there are visible signs of an invisible grace, is how the classic Augustinian definition of sacraments goes in the Western tradition of the church, which would involve Catholics, Roman Catholics primarily, but also Lutherans and Anglicans would be within that same framework. Tend to view sacraments that way, and there's a deeply sacramental quality to the book in the sense that from the very first couple of chapters, there's some deeply symbolic references to baptism and the regeneration through the waters of baptism, and some imagery that goes along with that with Severian. Again, somebody who's not, I think a lot of this imagery and symbolism can be gleaned by somebody who's not necessarily a Christian or not as what I would call a sacramental liturgical Christian. But I think since Wolfe doesn't always spell this out for you, it is helpful to have that kind of knowledge going into reading the book. So you pick up on some of these things, knowing Wolfe himself was a Catholic Christian. So that's the second theme of it. The third theme, third theme of spiritual symbolism that I was finding in Shadow of the Torturer was transformation, renewal of life, turning around and progressing in life. Severian is, much of the book, is not a good guy. I mean, there's a lot going on there. I mean, well, obviously his job, he's a torturer. I mean, it's a horrible place. There's graphic descriptions of what these people do. Basically, they're agents of the autarch, of the emperor, or whatever, of this futuristic world. And they're basically sent people not to even extract confessions. They just torture them. So it's a horrible place. But in the middle of that, though, you see how Severian over time, there's signs of something going on there. He's still got a lot of problems, but there's a transformational element to his story. And then, in the Shadow of the Torture, I think we're just scratching the surface again. And Claw the Conciliator, and it goes deeper. And then I'm looking forward to seeing what's next and the next books of the series.
Yeah,
So
and
those are kind of the three main categories of spiritual themes. There are other themes and categories I'm sure you could come up with. That's how I framed it and looked at it.
that's interesting. I think it could work as a good framework for our discussion today as well. These three themes that you have pointed out, I think they work fine. I think the one thing that can be good to know if you haven't read the book is that we won't go into so much to that today. Maybe I think the narrator Severian himself is unreliable. So that's a technique that many authors use, also in this book. So it's very difficult to, or maybe not. It depends. Because when I was preparing this video today in our conversation, I reread a few things. So then I think I spotted a few new things in Severian's way of telling the story that I didn't think about the first time. You don't know if he's speaking the truth or not. It's his more or less biased interpretation of what's happening during his journey. And that's important to know as well, I think.
Right. Many people have noted the unreliable narrator characteristic of Shadow of the Torturer and Wolfe's writing in general. Sometimes I think we've both talked with perhaps with Sam of the I Samwise channel, who is he has read many of these Gene Wolfe books. He thinks perhaps that is overplayed a little bit, if I remember correctly what his opinion was. I think that certainly is something you have to take into account, that when Severian repeatedly says things like, I have a perfect memory, but then some issue in the story arises that is inconsistent or somehow contrary to that opinion that Severian has of himself. Just recall that not in any first person narration, there's going to be bias, and there's going to be things that are affected. The recounting of events is going to be affected by one's personal perspective, which in Severian's case is quite complicated. But some of that develops in later, certainly in later books.
Yeah, I'm reading the Sun Eater series, which is, I would say, very light compared to Gene Wolfe, but still, Christopher Rucchio, the author, is very inspired by the Book of the New Sun. I suppose the narrator is unreliable. I'm further into that series, so there I can see a lot of new things and more things than I can see here. For me, I enjoyed the themes. I think we can focus on them. When I started to read this book, there is a lot of quotes I've gathered that I think inhabits spirituality, you could say. I think we can take them as we go along in the discussion, but a few things has to do with Severian's own values that I think is revealed, especially with the dog Triskele, for example. He seems to have a lot of own values that is not reflected in the guild, because he has this feeling of maybe helping, but that might be his way of describing things. I don't know that yet. So this is interesting, I think, and there are many perspectives on deity and religion. I know I don't have the word here. Theocentric, right? Theocentric. There are many of these words that are peppered throughout the book, I think.
He uses different words to describe the divine. The increate, the theocenter, are two that he uses.
Yeah. There is also in the beginning of the book a lot of reflections about legends. I have noted here, for example. and also what is life or where is life. We can come back to that, but where is life? It's a reflection he has on different parts of the body. Where is life? So for me, that has a lot of religious and spiritual connotations as well. So there's a lot of things that I caught up on when I was reading that made me very, very curious. And also the symbolism you talk about, especially, of course, the monastic perspective. I think that's obvious in a way, this order and the rules he has for his life that governs him. But also, I think that he is, as I understand it, an orphan because they don't know how they came to this guild, if I understand
They're
that
taken
right.
to this guild at a very, very young age, so they have no real memories or formation as a person outside of the guild. It's been totally formed within the Manachin Tower, the Citadel, as they call it. Um, uh, yeah, as far in Severian's case, I don't remember off the top of my head exactly if it's spelled out how he got there, but certainly he has appears to have no memories outside of it.
Yeah. Um, yeah, and many themes like on identity and I would say love as well is included in this book as well. So there's so much to talk about. I have a lot of quotations here, but maybe I have to wait on them. But from your perspective, then um, with the monastic, because there is a monastic perspective, I agree upon that. But then you have, it's a torturers guild, and then you have the perspective. I think that I don't know if you agree with that. That Severian seems to have a lot of input from his own spiritual self. I'm talking mostly about the dog here, but he seems to have ways of, being a rebel in a way. It seems like.
Yeah, I think that's part of the transformational quality that I alluded to as a third spiritual theme, and I think his compassion, his taking care of Triskull, this dog who's really not a dog. Again, there's lots of times the terminology. Uh, Wolfe will put in a term as an analog to help us understand the story, but it's not necessarily what the thing actually is in that world.
Hmm.
And I think Triskull is an example of that. But anyway, you're right. Your point is a good one. That I think that fairly early on in the story, that is an example of Severian having a heart and a soul, which is not devoted to just torturing people. He does have compassion on this creature, which is
Hmm.
a yeah. It's connected to another part of this citadel, this tower. They have all kinds of animals like that. Apparently, and Triskull was just left to die, if I remember correctly. But he has compassion on this creature.
Hmm. Yeah, I think that's interesting in itself. When it comes to the sacramental perspective that you were mentioning, for me, for example, there is if we talk, super non-spoilerish way, there is a lot of water here in the book in different ways. There is connection to water, for example. For me, that feels a bit, a lot, I would say, sacramental. But do you see other things, and can I maybe elaborate on that a bit?
Yeah, again, without talking spoilers, this is fairly early on in the books, but so it's not a huge plot spoiler. But I won't go into detail. But certainly, there's an encounter with water and sort of a rebirth that happens in early on in Severian's life, which is even alluded to in the chapters of Shadow of the Torture. The first chapter, for example, is called Death and Resurrection, which is
Mm,
immediately alerts you to the fact that something is going on there. Because normally, at least from a Christian perspective, you think of, well, it's death and then I don't remember. I may have misstated that.
No, I think it's
It's
correct.
death. You normally think of death and then resurrection. Good Friday, then Easter Sunday. But I think the first chapter is the resurrection
Yeah.
and death. So it
Yes.
inverts the order of how you might normally think of that. But Wolfe is tipping you off to that something's going on there with, again, this quasi baptismal imagery, which from a sacramental Christian perspective involves an actual regeneration, an actual new birth, the unity with dying with Christ and rising with Christ.
Mm. Yeah.
So yeah, that's certainly part of it. Later on in the book, I think there's a sacramental quality, or to a sense, with what ends up being the what the title of the second book is based upon, the claw of the conciliator. Although you just start to get hints of that by the end of the story, and to get into that, we definitely are in spoiler territory. So I won't say more about it than that. But yes, it's primarily in Shadow Torture. I think it's baptismal imagery is what I think of.
Yeah, very true. I think and I think as you say, the transformational aspects, another aspect of that. I think because I was thinking a lot of a you could say non-Christian perspective when I read this, even though I know it's a lot of Catholicism is in here, but I thought about this resurrection and death. I mean, in the Eastern religion, so to speak, the idea of transformation is very strong, or accepting opposites, for example, light and dark, and so on. So I think it's possible also to read this in maybe not that kind of strict context, but if you don't come from a Christian tradition, you can still read Gene Wolfe and appreciate the spiritual value of the book, I think.
Yeah, and I think what I should say at this point too is I'm not an expert in Gene Wolfe, so I don't know how all of his background. Again, I do know he was a Catholic Christian, but I also believe he was very widely read and did include other aspects of mythology and other world religions within the context of his story. I know I've heard others with more knowledge about it than I do, with their perspective. I certainly with Hinduism, you would be somebody that I would look to on that. What connections that you make? Because I would imagine Wolf he did seem to know a lot about a lot of different things. So if there are certain references to Eastern religion in there that I have missed, I certainly would accept that.
I think the rebirth or reincarnation of gods, if we talk Hinduism, is
Mm-hmm.
something you can at least or interpret or translate it into. Now I've just read the first book, so I don't know. Let's see. But as we say, it's transformation. You have all the stories of the many, many gods in Hinduism that are reborn, or avatars, or people who, are born again for different reasons and for different ways. That is another kind of rebirth than the Christian uh, rebirth, I would say, but it's still a transformation if we take it down to a human level, so to speak, how we can change our lives.
Very interesting. Thank you.
So, and with that, there is a lot of symbolism. If I read it, non-Christian, I mean, I have a lot of Christianity in myself as well, so as you know. But if I take off that hat, and read it, I see there is a lot of symbolism in the book. And actually, I found it very entertaining to look up a lot of words when I was reading. You found references to old Mesopotamian libraries and Christian stories or Christian saints and so on. What is your take on the symbolic value of Gene Wolfe's language?
Again, I in that respect, I can connect most significantly with the names that he chooses to assign to the different characters. And I do have some of my notes here, so I might allude to that as I'm talking here. This isn't a spoiler, but it's perhaps a something to keep in mind as you read the book, because sometimes it's not always clear who these people are, what
Yeah.
kind of creature they are. As I mentioned with Triskull, the dog, quote unquote dog, who's not really a dog. That's just one early example of that. But with some of the people that Severian encounters in the story may not actually be people, or different than what you would think of a normal human being acting or looking like. But one way of looking at it is, I'm fairly confident, I may not be totally correct on this, but I'm fairly confident that all of the humans in the story have saint names. Saints meaning, those in the Christian church, again, traditionally the liturgical church, sacramental churches, Catholic, Orthodox, Lutheran, Anglican, have been designated as saints on a calendar of saints throughout the church year. And for example, Severian himself, I mean, just there's actually, if you type in on Google, or you look up in Butler's Book of Saints or whatever, there's more than one Severian or Severus that's a saint, but most likely alluding to a saint of the early church from around, I think, around 300 AD or CE, whatever term you use, who was a saint, a martyr, subjected to extreme torture and martyrdom. So kind of ironic to name a character who is himself a torturer after someone who is tortured to death. So there's just symbolism in that. Of the other, just listing some of the other characters, Malrubius, one of the masters of the guild, he was a hermit monk in Scotland. Was killed by Norse invaders. Master Palaemon was a monk of Egypt and the founder of a monastic order. There's Drott and Roach, two other members of the guild who were, if I remember correctly, they were slightly older than Severian and became torturers shortly before he did. Those were also monks who were in the story, but also later on, there's other characters that come up as well. And generally speaking, if they're human, they have a saint name.
Yeah, I think that is a way of writing that makes everything much layered and deeper when you read. I think that's why the Ericksonian or Steven Erickson comparison comes, even though I think it's a bit different. But that you can, actually the book isn't that long either. So with just being 300 pages, I think there is so much depth because of it, that he writes in that way that you can find meaning in the words.
Right. This copy, that's about 276 pages.
Yeah. I was reading a quote for my wife earlier today when I was rereading and preparing this. And I just wanted to ask you about it. Let's see. Because we got so strong Christian connotations by this. It's about the Triskel, which we've talked about now a lot today already. It says like this: you are worried about your poor dog because he is lame, but he too may have found hospitality. And this is the quote we were talking about. You love him, so another may love him. You love him, so you may love another. And we both are grown up in church, so we strongly thought about the in Swedish church they say the love message from Jesus. I don't know if that's a connotation that is correct, but somehow we just thought about our teachings from church when we were small, when we heard.
Yeah, I hadn't it's funny how I thank you for quoting that, because again, I don't know if I had intentionally thought of that specific quote, but I'm hearing, yeah, the message of love. Um, Love one another as I have loved you.
Mm,
The message from Jesus. Um, Also, to that, wherever, Tricycle is a creature and not another human being, but there's certainly a commandment from Christ, or an exhortation from Christ, that wherever you see the hungry, the sick, the poor, uh, those in prison, the stranger, is when you welcome them in my name, Jesus says, is as if you have welcomed me.
mm,
So there's certainly, and that goes to to the part about hospitality in that quote, which is also actually a monastic foundation, particularly of the Benedictine order of monks. One of their core tenets of belief is to be hospitable to the stranger.
mm.
Um, so that's and to those in need. So excellent that you're spot on with highlighting that quote.
Yeah, we got really warm in our hearts when we when we talked about it this morning, because it's a very beautiful message as well, I think.
Yeah,
So,
that's a
um,
reference to John Wesley and Methodism there, by the way.
yeah,
Your heart
yeah,
is warmed.
yeah, we became happy.
Yeah.
uh, and another thing that I was thinking about, but that's maybe not so much Christianity. I'm not sure. It's in my book. It's page 64, by the way, so it doesn't match to your, I think. Um, there is a lot of book borrowing in the beginning of this book, we can say, that Severin is taking part in. And one thing that is quoted here or said here is that because they talk about, because it's books about legends that he brings up
Mm.
from the library, and then
Is this a book? Yeah, from Master Oltan that he gets from the library.
yeah,
Okay.
exactly.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
And um, the interesting fact, it says, is that every legend could be traced to half-forgotten facts. And then it says, you see the paradox. I assume, did that legend itself exist at that time? And if not, how came it into existence? So the number of these kind of philosophical questions are many in the shadow of the torture, which made me very intrigued of the book. I don't know if you can say it's a religious frame in that or not. I don't know. Um,
Hmm. I think that there's certainly a question that arises in this book of, again, we alluded to this a little bit before, we're talking about the unreliable narrator aspect of the story.
hmm,
But I think as this, again, we're just getting into the series in some respects, but uh, you know, how is this story written? What is the basis for these, for the narration? What is the are these stories told with the purpose, with an agenda, so to speak, or is it just the facts? I
hmm,
think all of those questions come into play, and I think uh, that whenever you're talking about um, a story like this one, and include and Wolf, I think, is, again, he drops little clues through some of his writing about
hmm.
what you should be looking for, and I think that that's an example of that. There's also, again, non. I think we're also still in non-spoiler
Hmm.
territory, but
Hmm.
um, again, this story is written, and I don't think this is a spoiler to say it's a in a dying Earth scenario
Yeah.
of a futuristic Earth. So there's recollections and hints of things in the past, which Severian's the past of the Earth, of looking from that futuristic vantage point, that are interesting to pick up on once you figure out what it actually is meaning. For example, there's painting of a desert-like landscape,
Mm.
and a person on it. Which once you figure out what that is, you're like, oh yeah, that's a that was Wolf is making us pay attention.
Mm. Yeah, yeah, definitely. You have to read it very closely. Maybe
Hmm.
something you can't do the first time, but when you do it second time or when you get
Right,
into the book,
right.
this unreliability. I'm thinking about the. I don't know if I'm correct or not. When it goes for Hinduism, at least, the idea is, there are so many religious stories, as you know, in Hinduism and gods and so on that they are contradictory, basically, many of them. And that is part of the, say, mystery that we cannot know how things were created. There is no creation myth in Hinduism, for example, as compared to Christianity. But when I listened to some priest here in Europe, Catholic priest, he said something like, from Italy, that if we would know everything, we wouldn't have a mystery. That's not something to believe in. So I think when I read about this unreliable narrator in the context of Gene Wolfe, I'm thinking about that aspect as well. If that's maybe not part of Christianity, so to speak, you don't need to answer from that perspective. But that the unreliability of the story is a kind of mysterious thing that is a kind of spiritual thing, maybe as well. I don't
Hmm.
know.
I hadn't thought of it that way, but I like that. Yeah, I'll give that some more thought.
Mm. Yeah. So as I said, a lot of food for thought in my head when I read this. So it started, it triggered a lot of spiritual thoughts for me. Um, I'm thinking about the three perspectives. I think we might have covered them a lot, at least as a non-spoilerish, um, focus: monastic, sacramental, and transformational. Then that we considered were spoilerish territory. Before we go into spoiler territory, I would say that and ask you about it as well. I found this story very interesting, but also strange, because I find the characters that Severian meets after he's expelled, Baldander and Dr. Talos and many others. I don't feel like they are real characters. They feel very um, artificially described, so to speak. They don't feel like real characters. Maybe voices in my head only, like Alice in Wonderland or something like that.
Well,
It's
we
very,
can get into that in the spoil once we
yeah,
get
yeah,
into the spoilers.
yeah. So I thought it was really strange, dreamy experience, I could say,
Hmm.
when
Right,
reading the book.
right.
Should we jump into the spoilers then? What do you think?
Sounds good. Okay, wave the flag to people who,
Yeah, I have a red pen here.
who-
So this is spoilers.
although if they've watched 48 minutes of or whatever, wherever we at this point of
Yeah,
discussion, they probably have, who knows, probably people who are sticking around have read it and are just wondering what we think about it. So
that's true. Yeah.
Talos and Baldanders, I mean, Talos is some kind of a robot or
Mm,
other non-human creature, and Baldanders is this sort of giant. Some allusions to whether he's one of the Nephilim, which is sort of these hybrid god human creatures of of Genesis. But
mm,
I I don't know that yet. But he's certainly, yeah, they're not ordinary human beings, which goes back to my point earlier that there's no Saint Talos or Saint Baldanders.
mm, mm.
These are not humans.
Yeah, and I had really hard time to place them in the story, their function and the purpose of them being there, because it feels like they popped up quite, in a not non-structured way, so to speak. That was my feeling when I first read about them,
Right.
because I thought everything up to until Severian was expelled was quite clear, as clear as this can be,
Right,
I think.
right.
And then it started to become more, I say,
The,
dreamy. The
the
story.
narrative gets more difficult, more dreamlike. What is going on here? And a lot of that revolves around two is who are Agila and Agilus. And again, you get the sense of that. Then you don't get that till the very end of the story, and the battle
Mm,
takes place after Severian is challenged to this duel.
mm,
You don't figure out quite what's going on there. Or at least I didn't figure out what was going on until there was the big reveal at the end about who the Severian's opponent was.
yeah, right,
Um,
right. Yeah,
so
yeah,
yeah, um, I think to kind of take advantage of what time we have remaining. If it's okay with
yeah,
you,
yeah, yeah.
jump back in the story a little bit, though, to I think a key aspect of the transformational characteristic of Severian's story is the death of Thecla
Yes.
and Severian's role in that. Um, because I think that is, again, there's different speculation I've heard in different podcasts and other people who interpret Book of the New Sun about what actually happened there with Severian and Thecla's death. But so far, at least, I've read it just in a straightforward fashion that yes, Severian, Thecla was, again, this person that Severian was charged with taking care of, in the Mansion Tower,
Mm,
basically waiting to be tortured. And then once the order comes to for her to be tortured, and she goes through this grueling experience, he provides the means for her to commit suicide,
mm,
which is morally problematic from a lot of perspectives. But in the sense of Severian's perspective, it was an act of compassion.
mm,
So she did not have to undergo another a grueling death.
mm.
Ultimately, is what would have happened. So yeah, what did you think about that?
I think first I actually had hard time to think about the merciful, what was merciful in the act. I had to think a bit about that, because he gave her the knife and she committed suicide. But then I'm thinking about this. There is an expression. I don't know if it comes from maybe Christianity or other faiths, but you're choosing the lesser evil. In the context of Severian, it's mercy because in relation to what he's supposed to do within his guild. So I think it posed a lot of questions about what mercy is to me. That
Right, right, yeah, that's a good. I think that's a great way to think about it. Um, I think Wolf. Again, I've read a few books outside of Book of the New Sun by Gene Wolfe, such as Pirate Freedom and The Devil in the Forest,
mm,
some of his short stories. And I think, although clearly he's Catholic and he's writing very much from a Catholic perspective in terms of his symbolism and other plot elements that he inserts into stories,
mm,
I think he's not he so far at least does not appear to me to be a rigid dogmatic person in terms of what you might call moral theology.
mm,
I think he seems to write from shades of gray instead of looking at things from black and white. And I think Thecla's death is certainly an example of that.
mm.
Um, it gets more looking at Thecla's death. I will say, gets more complicated the more you go on.
Yeah, because it's
You go on in the series, but it's. I won't say more about that at this
but
time.
there is the I'm not sure if I'm confusing it with the the little things I read in the Claw of Conciliator, but there is a confusion, right, with her death in, I think it's the middle
Yeah.
of
Yes, it
the first
gets
book.
it
What
gets
happened?
yes, it gets complicated, and I don't know if we want to go into the conciliator. Maybe save
No,
that
it's
for
too
follow
early
up
for me.
discussion.
Yeah.
But just always be on the lookout that things may not be exactly what we seem. Even when you start to think you've figured something out,
Hmm.
just put a footnote on that, and come back to that later when you've read more. I think is is a good rule of thumb for Gene Wolfe as I'm figuring out.
Yeah, but there was one thing in relation to Tekla's death that puzzled me, and that is um, because then he gets expelled.
Hmm.
Because immediately it feels like, I'm going to tell this to Palemon, right? Palemon.
Yeah,
Uh,
believe me. Hmm.
yeah, and if I read it this morning again. He It seems like the punishment should be maybe death for Severian, but it's not because of many different reasons, the guild's reputation and a lot of other things. So he gets this task to get sword and then go to tracks. That is a kind of mercy too. That was what I was thinking about with the mercy.
Sure, there's an element of mercy. Yeah, there's both a political level of, they didn't. The reputation damage to the guild, as you alluded to, if word got out that a prisoner was allowed to commit suicide instead of being tortured to death, that goes against the very reason why the autarch sends people there.
Mm,
Um, but on the other hand, there was a, I think, a relational, compassionate. Uh, you could tell, I think, from my recollection of how that narrative goes down about it was Master Palaman, um,
mm,
who um, who was talking with Severian about what had happened and what his punishment might be, and just yeah, giving a sword and giving him the means to go on and have a life afterwards after
mm,
this traumatic event.
mm.
But you can tell, yeah, even that that experience kind of shapes who Severian continues to be even after he leaves the guild.
Yeah, and he seems very rooted in his, let's say, core values of even after he leaves
Right.
the guild.
Yep.
Because and that's I'm curious about your take on that, because when he leaves the guild, I suppose his transformational journey begins as I see it. But how have you? Yeah, how do you see on that? What happens after he's expelled in relationship to these three themes you mentioned?
Yeah, he continued. I think that formation shows his discipline. I mean, he continues throughout the book. I mean, so his job title, so to speak, changes from torturer to executioner, and he's very I mean, he's very diligent. He's been given this task to go to this out community outside of Nessus and to go be their executioner. So he follows through on that. So I think he does have various disciplines, and I think that she even shows up in some of the some of the confrontations, fight scenes that arise after he leaves the guild.
Hmm.
But I think it also continues to show, um, his continuing um, growth, I guess, if you want to call it that, in terms of his relationships with others. He has, this has been pointed out certainly by other reviewers, continues to have problematic relationships with women.
Yeah.
Falls in love with every woman he meets, it seems like, and
Mm,
wants to go to bed with them. But
mm.
he but I slowly but surely he seems to have a more of a he has to he has a lot of growing up to do, I guess, is the one way you could put it. And you start to see that happening, I think, in this book.
Yeah, I think that's his relationship with women is an interesting aspect of the book. It's interesting to see how that develops, because you don't know if it's the, let's say, the author's perspective, or if it's the character's perspective on that as well. So that will be interesting to see as well.
Yeah, well, so what other thoughts? I mean, spoilery thoughts did you have that relate to anything or a spiritual perspective.
I think he meets new people there with Dorcas, for example, and also in the water.
Also, yep, more water, more deep. Dorcas, of course, is being somebody who was raised from the dead in the Book of Acts,
Yeah,
and so
yeah.
that's Dorcas being somebody who's presumed dead or actually dead there in the water, but then is back to life.
And then you have the altar scene with where they find the claw of the
Right.
conciliator,
And again,
right? So,
another kind of religious order to think about it that was entrusted with the claw, and all of a sudden they end up with it.
mm.
Hmm.
Uh, I think a lot of the spiritual things were maybe in the beginning, even if they are repeated in the plot. I'm still a bit confused actually by the everything that takes place with all these characters, Baldander and Dr. Talos,
Hmm.
for example. So I
Hmm.
haven't really figured that out, for example. There's many short stories in the story in the later parts of the books connected to see Gabriel. I don't think it's the archangel Gabriel though, but there are many references with biblical names throughout the book that I
Right.
think is recurring, and also yeah, that's very important. I think the in the beginning of the book it said that it's the signs that we don't interpret the signs, we just get the signs.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you remember that one. I think I have it
Yes, I don't have it in
here.
front of me, but
I have it here.
I
I
think that's
found
one
it.
of the more famous quotes from the book, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, probably. Yeah, yeah. We believe that we invent symbols.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, that's the idea. The truth is that they invent us. He has the example when a soldier takes their oath, they get this coin that he gets then, and as I understand it, it's the coin that forms Severian in this case. It's not the other way around. So we are formed by symbols. So that comes back in the end of the book. Um, Again, that everything is a sign. There is a story in the end about things just being signs, so to speak.
Right, right, right. The
How do
sign of a greater reality. Yeah, a sign or a symbol, is a representation of a greater reality in some way. Um, and yeah, that there's hints of that throughout this book for sure. And I think that's Wolf is again giving you a hint towards the beginning of the book of what he's alluding to here.
Yeah, and one thing I was curious about is there are a number of principles in the end of the book. The seven principles of governance. So that is very similar to this is in my book. It's before the chapter called Morning. That's the 34th chapter, and it's the in on my page it's 283, and then the last page is 284 in that chapter. So it should be the
So it's just before chapter 34.
yeah,
So
and
it's with
it's
the end of chapter 33.
um
Oh, okay. Oh, attachment to the person of the monarch, attachment to
yeah,
the
exactly
bloodline.
right.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
I found all those uh, very interesting, but I interpret them mostly politically, but I'm not sure.
Right. Right. Yeah. This is yeah. Severian is this a trying to recall the specifics of the context of this. Um,
Monastic.
yeah, there's this sort of the a conversation with Master Malrubius. Um, yeah. So that's yeah, yeah. What did you think of it?
I think it. I mean, just adheres to his old code that he
Hmm.
still uses. He seems very loyal to this way of thinking. I think it questions how transformational his journey is, yet, uh, at least for me. It depends on what you mean with transformational, I think.
Yeah, and it's there's the story goes on, transformation, attachment to an abstraction. And
Mm,
then the question is asked, of what kind, Severian, is your own attachment to the divine entity? Again, another
mm,
reference to God. Wolf never actually mentions God here, but increate, theocentered, divine entity.
mm,
Um, and Severian says nothing.
mm,
Um, to or and then he ends up connecting it to it would be a like attachment as to the person of the monarch or the autarch.
mm,
So I think, yeah, I haven't given much thought to that particular passage, but at least not for some time.
mm,
But certainly, it's a sign that um, the autarch in this world is very highly placed. And actually, there's a reference to um, within the rituals of the tower, in the Guild of Torturers, that there's a reference I caught that the autarch's words are as sweet as honey, which is a reference to
yeah.
Psalm 119.
Mm,
God's law is as sweet as honey. So
mm,
the autarch is almost considered to be like God, and
mm,
at this first point in time of the story.
yeah. Yeah, there is a lot. Did you find, or do you find, did you find other, in the spoiler area, spiritual science? I know there is a lot, so maybe, did you find something more you want to?
Um, I honestly think we've covered most of what um, uh, at least covered it in a certain sense, the most significant aspects of it. Well, going back to the sacramental, I mean, clearly you know, Severian's near-death experience in the River Guile is the baptismal sacramental experience we're talking about here.
Mm,
Dying and rising up out of the water, um, which is echoed again later in the story with Dorcas rising out of the water. Um, so yeah, I mean,
mm,
I think we've covered most of it.
yeah.
I mean, his exile again. His life is kind of this series of dying and rising, and I think his dying and rising out of which is a euphemism for the baptismal experience,
Mm,
dying and rising out of the River Guile, dying and rising by being exiled from this world the only world that he knows is growing up in the citadel with the Guild of Torturers, but rising as this new person who is on this journey outside of it,
mm,
to a new life outside the citadel. Um, those kinds of themes certainly keep coming up. Dying and rising, most literally, I guess, in the battle with what turns out to
mm,
be Agilus at the end of the book.
yeah.
He's
Yeah.
by the power of the claw of the conciliator. Um, he is dead but brought
Mm,
back to life.
yeah.
Yeah, and that indicated too by when Severian looks up, he sees the sky is a great Paschal egg. Paschal
Yeah.
being another name for Easter.
Mm,
Um,
mm,
so again, quite a distinct reference to the resurrection there.
yeah. Yeah, there is a lot of that, and probably it will continue, I suppose, in
Yeah, yeah,
later books as well. I think um, by the way, I think the ending is interesting when everything opens up and they march out of the gate. The books feels very different suddenly, and this strange guy Jonas, which I don't know so much about yet, has
right,
arrived.
right, exactly.
Okay. Well, I think maybe that's what we have to say for today. Always happy to have you here, Jay, on the
Yeah,
channel. It
it's good
gives
to be invited. Thank you. I enjoyed this. I love this book series, and to be able to talk with it talk about it with somebody with a spiritual background like you is a real treat. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you too. And for me, it's because we have not same, but we have the same Christian background. That's it. I think this is very interesting for me to, with my transformation, you could say, that I've done in life, with talking again to you with your Christian background. It's very positive for me as well. So I have a lot of Christian contacts where I grew up, but not so many here where I live now in
Mhm.
Stockholm. So that's interesting too. So that gives me a lot of rewards too. If you are or watching or want to give your take on our discussion, please write it in the comments below. Or if you have any ideas on theories on the Book of the New Sun, and especially Shadow of the Torture, we are very happy to hear that as well. So until next time, we'll see you soon, and have a great Sunday. It's late here in Sweden now, not too late, but it's a bit later than in the US for UG. So take care wherever you are in the world as well. So thank you and bye.